apologize. And as some of you can see on our live YouTube stream, it is beautiful. I mean, just have a look around, guys. Have a look around. Now, before I dive on in and explain the structure for this evening and what we'll be covering, let me introduce our guests and let them give their opening statements. Firstly, we have Merton councillor and list candidate for the Liberal Democrats, Hina Bokhari. Hina, if you'd like to join us.
Hello, and are you ready for my opening statement as well now? Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Okay. Hi everyone. Jobs, homes, clean air, 3 basic needs, and we're being let down on all 3. It's time to take London forward. It's time for a new challenger to the mayor and to elect a strong London Assembly team at City Hall. Let's reinvent our high streets by investing in them, supporting small businesses and providing services which local people need. Let's create an apprenticeship hub so that young people don't come out of this pandemic as a lost generation. Let's create homes in the heart of the city, take control of delivering quality, affordable, zero carbon homes with clear and rigorous standards. Let's beat air pollution, a silent killer in London, by investing in green transport and focusing on a green recovery. I was born in London, I love London, and I know London is liberal. We don't need more of the same. We need something different. So vote for the Liberal Democrats on all 3 ballot papers and vote to take London forward.
Perfect. And from the Conservatives standing for the Merton and Wandsworth London Assembly member seat, we welcome Wandsworth councillor Louise Calland.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry, it had to happen to one of us at some point this evening. I've now unmuted myself. Evening, everybody. So we're all here and standing in this election because we believe London is the greatest city on the face of the earth. But we face big problems, and the pandemic has only exposed how deep these run. Knife crime is at a historic high. Good homes are unaffordable, and investment in our transport network has dried up. As well as that, the cost of living just keeps rising, and the current Mayor of London won't take responsibility for any of it. He's had 5 years to fix London's problems, but instead of fixing them, he's let our problems get worse while blaming others for his failure. For London to recover, we can't go back to where we were before. We need a fresh start. And that's what Sean Bailey and I want to give you on May the 6th. So Sean was born in a council house and raised by a single mum. He was homeless in his 20s, but he's turned his life around and spent 20 years as a youth worker helping other people do the same. He's lived the problems that so many Londoners face, and he knows what it means to be in the position that many of you are in, and he knows how those problems translate into the policies that he wants to put up for you this evening. He wants to make London safe by hiring new police officers, tackle the causes of crime, get young Londoners on the housing ladder by genuinely building new affordable homes.
That is time, I'm afraid, Louise, for your 1 minute. Sorry, I did try.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Next up from the Labour Party, we are joined by current Merton and Wandsworth Assembly member and leader of Wandsworth Labour, Leonie Cooper.
Hi, Stephen, and hi, everybody else. It's good to be here this evening. Look, Sadiq came in 2016, as did I, as the new Labour Assembly member for Merton and Wandsworth. He inherited 8 wasted years from the previous Conservative mayor, and there have been huge cuts made to London's budget since 2010. He has fought against the cuts that have been going on, massive cuts to the police service, £1 billion cut to the police service when Sean Bailey himself was in number 10 and was part of the team that decided on those cuts. So it's completely ironic that he's now arguing that he wants to see more police officers on the street. Huge cuts more recently to TfL when everybody stayed at home due to the pandemic. The only transport authority in London that wasn't, only transport authority in the country that wasn't given money by the government was TfL. We know that Londoners are open and inclusive, and these are not the values that Sean and the Conservatives in London share. We want London
that's time, Leonie.
And be open. Vote Sadiq Khan.
Thank you very much. And last but definitely not least, we have Hannah Graham, who is standing for a London-wide list position for the Green Party.
That's right. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really proud to be standing for the Greens as an Assembly candidate. And I also do a bit of online radio DJ myself, so it's great to be here at Riverside. So I really know that London could be the greenest city in the world, and Greens really want to build it with and for every citizen. All the evidence shows that Londoners are really crying out for a new start, a recovery that raises everyone up and creates a secure future for all. one that we can pass on to the next generation with pride. A real green recovery raises everyone up, creates a secure future for everyone. And our Assembly members have worked hard every single day, listening to groups across the city, charities, campaigning groups, experts, young people, and achieved real change over the past 5 years that I'll talk to you about in the questions. Our renters are in despair, homelessness is rising, traffic is going up, and women and minorities are harmed every single day by prejudice. We've got toxic air, people on the lowest incomes are struggling, and our youth services are being devastated by cuts. Things can be different. Greens have a transformative plan to change London for the better. You'll hear all the candidates talking about a green future today. So if you want green, vote green.
Perfect. So for the benefit of you listeners at home, I'll explain just what's happening next. There's each party's representatives and on to the order of the evening. Over the next 90 minutes or so, each candidate will answer 8 questions across all of the topics that matter to us here in Southwest London. We've gone out, we've asked residents, we've asked charities, we've asked community organisations for what questions they want asked. Unfortunately, we are battling some technical difficulties, so we won't be able to play out the audio of the questions live. But for those of us watching on YouTube, you will have the questions on screen, and I will be reading out the questions for those of you listening at home. Each candidate will get a total of 2 minutes to answer the question before we move on to the next. Now, if you're listening along on the radio or watching the debate play out live on YouTube, why don't you join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #SouthwestLondonDebate. And if that's not enough, head over to our partners at the SWLondoner.com to watch their live reaction play out on the live blog. And to close out the show, I'll be joined live in the studio by a journalist from Southwest Londoner, Tom Holmes, local multimedia reporter, Monica Charsley, and freelance political reporter and founder of the political podcast, Why Bother by Mark Mayo. Now, without wasting any more further time, let's dive into the questions. So for the first question, this is from Sophie Derrick, a Barnes resident. My question to the candidates is, with misinformation about COVID-19 on the rise, none of you have scientific or clinical backgrounds. How can we trust you will make the right decisions about coronavirus in the city or for health provisions in general? So for the first question of the night, we're going to come to you, Louise. And just quickly beforehand, it could be considered particularly pertinent with everything going on in central government that it's coming to you. It certainly caught the attention of your colleague, Hannah Jeanette, who had tried to distance herself from the party, as reported by Southwest Londoner. Initially, she was keen to distance herself from the Conservative Party brand, which she admitted had been tainted by the ongoing sleaze and lobbying scandal. Jeanette said, "I am aligned with the Conservatives on policy, but it does not mean I have my fingers in the till." Louise, what do you say to that?
So I'm going to answer the question first, if that's okay, and then I'll come back to you on your second point. So about coronavirus within London. So I have to say, I personally do have a background in health policy. That's what I do, and it very much influences my thinking in the way that a lot of my policies are thought about, especially with a focus on prevention. I will also say that one of the things that really became clear during the pandemic was actually how much we rely on both the biotech and the pharmaceutical sector. And so that's why one of the pledges from Sean is to increase the funding in MedCity, which was a previous Conservative Mayor's initiative, by 5 times. So really ensuring that the companies who have been responsible for the innovation behind the vaccines that are saving people's lives is within London, and linked to that, investing in institutions like the Crick Institute that is just by King's Cross. So very much seeing the biotech and pharmaceutical sector as a way to deal with that. So I would argue that with my own background and with Sean's thinking around MedCity, actually we do have quite a good line on health policy on this. I think it's also worth mentioning the vaccines programme, because it has been an outstanding success by this government. There have been over 40 million people have received a vaccine. That is amazing by any standards, and looking at how the rest of the world is doing, we really are up there with the best of them. So I will then come back quickly, I think, on your last point about Hannah, who I have known for many years, and I think all she was probably trying to say is that she's completely squeaky clean, as lots of politicians are and lots of normal people are. And I think that was what she was saying, and that's what she meant. I haven't spoken to her about it, but I see her out campaigning every single day for the Conservative Party, and I know that she's a true Tory at heart.
Perfect. Leonie Cooper, let's come to you next on this.
Thanks, Stephen. Sadiq doesn't have a background in the medical sciences, and neither do I. But he's been consistent, clear, and honest with Londoners throughout the pandemic, and indeed was calling for people to wear masks on public transport when the government at that point was still saying that masks weren't proven in terms of their efficacy. And I think it's really crucial that we listen to the scientific advice and we do whatever is being told to us by those who are the scientists to protect ourselves from the virus. Unfortunately, we have seen, and now accusations of sleaze, which is really unpleasant, around the government and their procurement processes, last minute U-turns from the government on lockdowns and social distancing. I think it's really, really important that even though the rollout of the vaccine, which has gone so well through the National Health Service, which is rolling it out, not the government, the National Health Service, which of course we all have been clapping and applauding the National Health Service for what they've done. But it's really important that we continue to observe social distancing, washing of hands and wearing of masks. And at the moment, we're all starting to enjoy some of the fruits of the recent lockdowns. It's been really, really tough on so many of us, really, really difficult. But, we mustn't lose the benefits of that. And I think if we look at what's going on in, for example, Brazil and India, you can see if you don't observe all of the distancing and the hand washing and the masks, how difficult things can become again. The Mayor has developed a recovery programme worth £544 million that's helping us to build back better, including £32 million for Londoners who need to develop new skills in new areas of the economy, and £6 million to help reopen central London, which is going to happen when it's safe to do so. So I think we have a bright future. It's been a really difficult year for so many of us, so many people isolating.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you off there, Leonie. You're out of time.
The Mayor is ready to take us forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Next up, we'll come to Hannah Graham from the Greens.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't have a health or science background, but in order to comply with the Green Party manifesto, our Assembly members Sian Berry and Caroline Russell have met with experts from lots of charities, from lots of groups, campaigning groups, to ensure that our manifesto is expert backed and expert written. The Green Party have been very critical of the misinformation in the media and of the government's mishandling of the pandemic, calling for a full public and judge-led inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic on the one-year anniversary of the first national lockdown back in March. So the government's mishandling of this pandemic has resulted in thousands of avoidable deaths and left many families grieving for loved ones who died before their time. And now that the success of the vaccine rollout means that we're no longer in the depths of the emergency, and lots of us are enjoying that as well at the moment, there's absolutely no reason to delay a public inquiry any further. We know from the huge health crisis this year that inequality really thrives in the gaps, and that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for London, doesn't work for housing, transport and many specialist services, because specific groups' needs haven't been met. And even before the crisis, Sian Berry and Caroline Russell work with citizens and campaigners and expert groups that I talked about across the city, exposed huge problems. Coronavirus has exposed some of the worst gaps in our systems. Most of the responsibility for this lies with the government and years of austerity. But these systems can be changed. We really need to see a recovery from this crisis that works for everyone. A Green Mayor will bring new thinking to our economy and a mission to transform how London does business. A green recovery means making London the city best prepared for the future, that we can come out of this quickly and sustainably from the coronavirus pandemic. We've all struggled this year, and thank to the amazing work of the NHS. That we've been very vocal about supporting, but we know some people have suffered much more than others, and that the pandemic has exposed serious health inequalities. So we really need to see a holistic transformation to all of our public services in order to come out of this pandemic crisis effectively, along with prepare London to face the many other challenges that we're about to face.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hina Bokhari, let's come to you.
Thank you so much for your question, Sophie. I think what we need to be really clear about, the Liberal Democrats have always been an evidence-driven party, and we've always referred to the experts when it came to any of our policies or ideas, and nothing that we've ever done has been based on anything but the evidence and the data. Unlike, unfortunately, our government, Boris Johnson unfortunately missed crucial meetings at the beginning of the pandemic. He had a real lack of urgency and a real understanding of what was the situation. And that's a real shame and it's a real tragedy, because hundreds of thousands of people have been affected by this and many people have lost their lives. And it's a awful situation to think that our Prime Minister would rather have piles of dead bodies than go into a lockdown to save people's lives. That's the reality. And it's a real shocking way for the government to be behaving. Now, I think that Ed Davey is absolutely right. The leader of our party is asking for an inquiry into what's happened during the pandemic, and that is necessary. Let's find out where things went wrong, because they did. They seriously went wrong. And thank goodness for the NHS, because if it wasn't for them, we would have been in a far, far worse situation. And one of the things that the party is trying to push forward is to oppose something that the government have started to raise, something called a vaccine passport. Now, a vaccine passport is unfair, it's discriminatory, and it goes against civil liberties. So these are the things that we're really worried about now, that they're using this excuse now to infringe people's rights and freedoms. So the Liberal Democrats are evidence-based. We will refer to the experts, and we will be making sure that your freedoms are not impacted by the decisions of this government. But at the end of the day, all thanks to the nurses and doctors, not the government.
Thank you very much, Hina Bokhari. So next up, we have a question from Kenneth Jordan, who is the co-chair of the Queenstown Ward Safer Neighbourhood panel. He says, hello, my name is Kenneth Jordan. I'm co-chair of the panel here in Wandsworth, London. We have a highly regarded team of officers in our ward with a degree of loss from police cuts and front office closures since 2011. Can you guarantee you'll restore the number of officers from pre-cut levels and increase the number of police community support officers for our community? Leonie, we'll kick off with you, but just quickly beforehand, how can we rely on any figure from you or the mayor after he admitted in an interview the other day that he couldn't guarantee how many police he would be able to hire over his second term as mayor?
Well, anyone who's part of this debate who says that they can guarantee to restore the number of officers to 2011 levels is probably not completely trustworthy. And the reason why the mayor said that is that there have been cuts since 2010 when the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition came in. And London's police numbers were kept up until 2012 because of the Olympics, but they've been going down since 2012. And the only reason why there has been any increase at all back up towards the 32,000 officers that we need is because Sadiq has had to increase the council tax element that the mayor is able to charge Londoners to try and increase the number of officers. £1 billion has been taken out of the police budgets in London, and that's really what he's commenting on. And the Home Office has admitted that they underpay London for the amount of money that it costs to protect national bodies such as Parliament, embassies from abroad, and Buckingham Palace. So Londoners have to pay for that amongst the costs that we pay towards the police. But despite those cuts, and before we get into other people saying, oh, knife crime has gone up under Sadiq, it has been rising since 2014. Look at the figures, and that is to do with the decrease in the number of officers and also the cuts to local authority budgets. And that has all been because the Conservative government has been decreasing the amount that councils can spend on diversion from crime, as well as the actual number of officers. So Sadiq has been leading from the front to tackle violent crime and being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, and has tried to put as many officers back onto the streets. That has meant raising his share of the council tax. He's recruited a victims commissioner. He's put £60 million into tackling violence against women and girls, and is just about to review the strategy for women and girls. He's also set up England's first...
Leonie, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off. You've run out of time here.
Similar to the violence reduction unit in Glasgow. And that is the way forward as a partnership with many other organisations.
Thank you very much for your answer. Hannah, we're going to come to you next.
Thanks, Kenneth. Yeah, so Greens, we take a public health approach to so much of our work. You know, we know that the importance of a good start in life, the impact that experiences in childhood can have to risk mental health issues, getting into trouble with finances and crime in the future. In terms of officer numbers, we will restore full road policing numbers, but everything else is a little bit different. So actually, Assembly candidates in South West London and in City and East have been doing a bit of research on the number of officers working in local ward teams in their area of London, and they've obviously found like a consistent drop since the mayor took over in 2016 in the number of police staff in each safer neighbourhood team, and a big drop in available police front counters in the Central East area under both the previous and current mayors. And yeah, a Green mayor, you know, will use every possible resource to bring more officers back into local ward teams, make them more effective, including recruiting new police officers with new government funding and making the case for more. We think it's really important. We think it should be a sustainable way to build safer local communities, and these cuts must be reversed. Only a Green mayor will recognise the importance of local policing and make our local police team a real priority. And we know that it's more than that. You know, it's more than just putting police on the street. It's about supporting strong communities, tackling root causes and addressing inequalities. That's the best ways to prevent harm in London, and that's the best way that we can, you know, we can't just enforce our ways out of London's problem. We always seek to prevent crime at the earliest possible stage, so shifting priorities into local communities away from tactics that we know are like counterproductive, such as cannabis enforcement and widespread non-intelligence based stop and search. So we know that some crimes are currently treated unequally, so we'd want to put more resources into domestic and sexual violence and tackling road crime, which is why we would want to restore the numbers there. So I'm sure we'll come on to more of this later. I'm running out of time, but yeah, making roads safer, cutting speed limits, that's definitely a priority for the Greens.
Thank you for finishing promptly there, Hannah. Hina, we'll come to you next.
If you look at our manifesto, you'll see that the key policy for us is community policing, because with local police officers embedded in the community, that's how we prevent crime. We're going to double the number of local ward officers. Now, as a local councillor, I can tell you what a difference it makes when residents see police officers and get to know the names of their police officers and be able to trust them and being able to communicate with them quickly. There's a real problem though, because of the fact that a lot of our police stations have been closed down. Under the current mayor, we have lost 106 stations. There's only 36 left. That's not enough. Now, we're really involved with this in Merton. The Merton Liberal Democrats councillor Paul Kohler was attacked in his own home. He lived very close to the Wimbledon police station, and so he was incredibly affected by the fact that if he didn't have those police officers, he would have died. That's why he went forward with a judicial review, and we managed to reverse Sadiq Khan's decision, and we managed to keep Wimbledon police station open. Now, we've got that dedication to do the same across London, and that's what we want to do as the London Liberal Democrats. We also want to make sure that we increase our trust in our police officers. There's no point in getting to solve crime unless people are going to come up to the police officers and help them investigate. One of the things that we really want to do is actually to scrap suspicionless stop and search. If we are going to increase our trust in our police officers, people who are affected by crime need to be able to feel that they can go up to these officers at any time. And there's a lot of people who are infected by crime, and that involves Black Londoners. Now, Black Londoners are more likely, 50 times more likely to be stopped by police officers than white Londoners. Now, if we were to stop this approach, we would get trust back again. That's the key for us.
Perfect. And finally, but last but not least, we'll come to Louise Calland on this.
Thank you. So London is less safe than it was in 2016 when the mayor came to power. Robbery is up by 86% and knife crime is up by 60% in that period. So fundamentally, London is less safe than when Sadiq Khan became mayor. So Sean pledges to put 8,000 new police officers on the streets, as well as 500 British transport officers, as again, we have seen sexual assaults on the tube rise by 43% in the last 3 years. So again, it's very important that we look at these particular hotspots of crime. I think even the other week, the mayor admitted that London wasn't safe for women and girls. It is his responsibility to make London safe for everybody. He is the London Police Crime Commissioner. So yes, 8,000 new police officers. We will reopen all 38 of the police front counters that were closed under Sadiq Khan. I know that Stephen Hammond has been working for many years around Wimbledon Police Station, and Sean, again, if elected, has pledged that will be kept open, as I know it's a fight that has been going on for many years. I think to address some of the other points that have been made, the money is there. It's just a matter of priorities and what you see as a priority to spend the money on in London. So, for example, Sadiq Khan increased his PR budget by 26% in the last few years. He spent almost 100 million since 2016 and has more PR officers than the Prime Minister. So that is how we will be funding part of the funding that go towards these new 8,000 new police officers, finding that money from City Hall and using it in for what we think should be the priority for London.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So moving on to our next question. This is from Jim Wagner from the Merton Cycling Campaign. He says, we're facing a climate emergency and getting more people walking and cycling is a key way to tackle that. What measures would you push for the mayor and the boroughs to introduce to make people make fewer journeys by car and more by bike or foot? Hannah, we're going to come to you first, but I just wanted to point out Green parties have obviously been wholly on board with low traffic neighborhoods, but there's been an obvious public backlash with some declaring that there is a war on motorists. Are the answer to encourage towards low traffic neighborhoods, or is it something else that we need to figure out?
Yeah, Greens really want to make it easier and safer to get around for everybody. We really need to be taking traffic off our road. We're fully in support of low traffic neighbourhoods, but they do have to work for the community. So we're fully on board with, low traffic neighbourhoods need to be arranged, but in communities. So councils and communities need to be empowered and funded to develop their own, and citizens have to have a voice in that procedure. It can't just be a sort of one size fits all approach. So yeah, definitely getting community voice on board. We approach transport prioritising the healthiest, safest and most efficient ways to get around. Our transport policies mean comprehensive walking, cycling and green public transport projects would get new investment, while the current mayor's plans that will make traffic and pollution worse will just be cancelled. So, Green Mayor will set a bold goal for London's overall traffic miles to reduce by 40% in 2026 and 60% in 2030. And we'll achieve this by a number of things. So improving city planning, aiming for essential services within 15 minutes locally on foot, removing the zones and creating a flat fare for public transport across London, extending the ultra low emission zone to cover the whole of London by October 2022, replacing the current mayor's ultra low emission zone scheme, which merely encourages less polluting cars on our roads, with a smarter, fairer, privacy-friendly road pricing plan, which basically would charge people by miles rather than like a daily congestion charge as current, and all while making streets safer and accessible for children, older and disabled people to walk, wheelchair or cycle. So we're really taking steps in the right direction to ensure that we're carbon neutral by 2030, while the mayor is invested in harmful contracts such as the Silvertown Tunnel, which we absolutely oppose. So we would cancel this and all airport expansion, and we've got creative ideas for closing London City Airport and regenerating the site, building homes and creating opportunities for business. So that could create so many new homes, it could create 16,000 new jobs and 400 million to the UK economy. So we've really been exposing the current mayor's cycle delivery failings and zero carbon pathways model, which is still set with a target of 2050.
You've run out of time, I'm afraid. Hina, let's come to you next.
Well, clean air is essential and running throughout our manifesto, and we can't get that without making sure that we invest in a clean and green transport system, and giving options, greener options to people who are travelling. Scrapping the 2 billion polluting Silvertown road tunnel is exactly what we need to do, because with those savings we can then make sure we go into greener transport options instead. Now, Louise Calland, our mayoral candidate, is calling the Silvertown road tunnel a dirty little secret, because it's nowhere in the Labour manifesto. It's not mentioned at all, and we need to make sure that everyone knows that this is happening. It's incredibly wrong to put in an extra road and then say you're wanting to have less cars on the street. It doesn't make any sense. What we're saying is that we want to have fair single London-wide pay-as-you-go road pricing, so that we're charging cars based on emission levels and the distance that's travelled and the congestion levels. We want to make sure that we have a road charging system that's fit for the future. We're also really keen to get people onto a bike, and I'm a little bit nervous about getting on bikes, and it's not something that I'm very natural to, but what I love about our idea is that we want to have free bike hire every Sunday. That really will encourage everyone to get out there and enjoy London. And then, you know, you get used to the idea of getting onto a bike. It's a fun way to get people involved. We're going to double expenditure on cycle infrastructure by 2024. And we've got to do other things. We've got to make sure that our public transport is accessible. Caroline Pigeon has been leading the way in the London Assembly to make sure that more stations are accessible. And I'm in my own ward in Motser Park, we've managed to get a promise from the Chancellor that they will be putting some funding towards Motser Park to have step-free access. That's how we go forward.
Wonderful. Coming to you next, Louise Calland, what do you have to say on this?
Thank you. A fresh start is a good phrase, because we all need fresh air. Sean is a cyclist and he is asthmatic. So for him, the priority of air pollution and air quality is high on his agenda. So the way that we're approaching this is perhaps slightly different to the last two candidates. So what Sean wants to do is ensure that the mayor is doing as much as possible. So we'll be looking at faster electrification of the bus fleet. So at the moment, it's not set to go fully electric until 2030, but we're looking to bring that sooner. We're also looking to do interest-free loans for black cabs, because if you were to turn every black cab electric, then that's the equivalent of taking 1 million diesel vehicles off the roads in London. So we're looking at the things that the mayor can personally do, rather than necessarily looking to add to an increase in the cost of living to Londoners at this time, because we look at the mayor's current projections and ambitions around this in order to try and sort out TfL's finances that, as we all know, have been struggling since he took charge and took over control. You have the congestion charge that is now 24/7, so it's no longer really about congestion, it's just the charge. You've got the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone, which, while I completely agree with ultra-low emission zones in general, I think the boundary is poorly thought through. It will cut Wandsworth in half, and actually comes at a time when lots of people can't afford to make a transition to a compliant vehicle. And you've also got the outer London road tax as well to add on to that, another £5.50 if you're a small business that comes in from the home counties and surrounding London. So what Sean wants to do is take on that responsibility as mayor, rather than putting everything onto the individual. But over and above that, in terms of ensuring that London is as green as possible, we have a biodiversity strategy. We are looking at wildlife corridors for bees, for hedgehogs. We've got great plans about living walls and investing
Louise,
a lot in
I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you there. You've run out of time.
Well,
sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
Leonie, I saw you shaking your head the entire way through that. So why didn't you tell us what you were thinking there?
So one of the problems with the funding for London transport is that the previous mayor, who's now the Prime Minister, was asked by the Conservative Prime Minister and Chancellor to give up the Transport for London operating grant of £700 million per annum. So that has been lost to Transport for London for all of those years. Now, Sadiq, against that background, has had a policy of both prioritising Londoners' health, but also trying to save Londoners' money. So he's frozen TfL fares for the past 5 years, introduced the Hopper bus fare, which I'm sure Hina would remember actually was a Liberal Democrat policy. And I just would point out at this point that the Liberal Democrats and the Greens and Labour do work very collaboratively in the London Assembly, and I'm afraid it's just the Conservatives and UKIP who've been against a number of the clean air policies, have been arguing against them, and the mayor has been introducing them in the teeth of their disapproval. So the ultra low emission zone in central London was first introduced, and a huge amount of consultation, really, really important, started from June 2016, literally a month after Sadiq arrived in City Hall for the central zone, and that was preceded by the T-charge, and is now going to, hopefully, if Sadiq is re-elected in on the 6th of May, by the expanded zone. And we need that to try and help people who are suffering. Ella Kissy Deborah and the amazing judgment that has just come through from the coroner stating that air pollution is actually a cause of stunting children's lungs and causing death. So we really have to take action, but we also need to consult people. We need to take them with us. And we also need to sort out TfL's finances, which I'm afraid were left in a mess by the previous mayor. Sadiq reduced the deficit by 71%. But of course, we then ended up in the pandemic. And because we don't get an operating grant, unlike all other megacities around the world, we're in a situation where TfL is completely reliant on fare paying customers. Now, the government chose to bail out other transport operators, private and public, all around the rest of the country. We need support from the government. Londoners have done the right thing. We stayed at home, but we do need support. And then we can come back safely and use public transport, and we can fulfill the mayor's transport strategy. 80% of journeys, active travel on foot, by bicycle, or on public transport. Thank you.
You knew what I was going to say there, Leonie, didn't you? All right, time for our next question. So this is from Oliver Lord from the Environmental Defence Fund for Europe. London is breaching legal limits for air pollution, and nearly all of it doesn't meet World Health Organization standards. How are you and your party going to be a mayor for clean air in the next term? Hina Bokhari, let's come to you first.
Sorry, something happened to my computer there, and I missed the last bit of your question.
How are you and your party going to be mayor for clean air in the next election? Obviously, here in Southwest London, especially, we feel it with Putney High Street finishing as one of the top 3 worst performing streets in all of London. So, your thoughts on this?
It's definitely what I've already said. It's part of our main policy areas to have clean air, and the Liberal Democrats have got some really interesting ideas about this. Other than the fact that we've already mentioned Silvertown Tunnel and using that investment instead on green transport, we also want to do something called green roofs. So every roof in London, trying to make them green. It's a policy that's actually been taking place in Chicago and Copenhagen. It will mean that there'll be some requirements on new commercial and large-scale residential buildings provided through business rate systems for retrofitting their projects. We also want to create 10 new parks in London, and we want to try and reach the target that the Mayor of London didn't quite reach, which was to he promised 2 million trees to be planted, and only 10% of those have been planted. So that's the way forward for us to get clean air. And Louisa is absolutely passionate about this because she has got asthma because of the pollution in London. And if you look at the record of the Liberal Democrats, 4 out of 5 of the top 5 councils in England are really highly rated in things like recycling. We are really pushing forward that green agenda in the Liberal Democrats, and I hope that Oliver will see that within our policies and our manifesto.
Louise, let's come to you next.
Thank you. So I think I'll talk a little bit more about our active travel plans in response to this. So you all know the Santander cycles, but of course before they were the Santander cycles, they were affectionately known as the Boris bikes because they were a scheme put in by the last Conservative mayor. And we've been looking at this and thinking, actually, while it's something that's enjoyed by many of the inner London boroughs, the scheme hasn't really been extended to the outer London boroughs as much, but given the increased distances into central London, what we want to do is put in electric bikes instead. Personally, I love electric bikes. It means that I can go up hills without running out of puff. So I'm a big fan of this policy. So because, I mean, if you think about it, some of these commuting distances are about 10K, and, you know, some cyclists don't necessarily feel as though that's the distance that they can cover. So we're going to widen and expand access to the cycle network and the current cycle hire network, but with electric bikes as well. I also want to talk a little bit more about living walls. So those are the vertically planted gardens that you sometimes see, but those can reduce pollution up to 30%. And what we want to do is use money from the TfL Healthy Streets Fund to ensure that these are planted around all the schools that exceed the legal limits for air pollution. So to ensure that children have access to better air quality. This is on top of the electrification of the bus fleet and electric cabs that I was talking about before. And I would also say, just as a quick point at the end, and in response to some of the other answers on the last question, that actually TfL's debt did hit a record high of 12 billion even before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So that is an increase of 30% in TfL debt since Sadiq Khan took over.
Wonderful. Leonie Cooper, what are your thoughts on this?
In 2012, the World Health Organization designated diesel to be a definite carcinogen, and the response of the then Mayor of London was to do absolutely nothing. So in 2016, 4 years later, during that 4-year period from 12 to 16, an extra 500,000 diesel emitting vehicles came onto the roads of London. So right from the very beginning, Sadiq Khan has been struggling against 8 years of previous gross inaction. The first Labour mayor introduced the Central London Congestion Zone, and the current Labour mayor introduced the ultra low emission zone. And it's absolutely critical in terms of air quality that we go further and faster. But it's really, really difficult to persuade people, and that's why you need this extensive consultation, which is why it started in June 2016. We found also a report that had been hidden by the previous mayor in a drawer in his desk, saying that 477 schools were in really polluted areas, and that's now been reduced to 14 schools due to the introduction of the ultra low emission zone and work that has been done. And I'd just like to pay some tribute again to the work of the Green and the Liberal Democrat Assembly members, who have very much worked with the Labour Assembly members and with the Mayor on this agenda of cleaning up London's air. But it's it's a process that's ongoing. Sadiq has launched 12 low emission bus zones. I launched the first one in Putney High Street with him. And it has meant that instead of breaking the law by the 2nd or 3rd of January, it has made Putney much, much better, the high street there, but it still breaks the law over the course of the year. So there's so much more that needs to be done. We need the expanded ultra low emission zone to come in October 2021. We still need to go further in terms of electric buses. It's a shame that more wasn't done under the previous Conservative mayor. But it's a gradual process. We also need more hydrogen buses. We need to make sure that we're encouraging people.
Leonie, I'm afraid that's time.
Take active travel as well. Thank you.
You're getting there anyway. Hannah Graham, let's come to you on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, we know air pollution is deadly and it deepens inequalities across London. So we have a right to clean air, and we really need every possible action taken to save lives. We know that our toxic air quality is having huge effects on our children's cognitive development, asthma, and even death. That's obviously, as referred to what Leonie was talking about. We really need to extend the ultra low emission zone to reach the whole of London, to cut down on harmful traffic, to protect our health and the planet, and to cancel harmful contracts such as the Silvertown Tunnel and airport expansion. London could really be leading the way with our response to the climate and ecological crisis, but no mayor of our city has yet really acted with the real urgency that we need. It was Greens on the London Assembly that pushed for the mayor and the Assembly to declare a climate emergency, sparking a wave of councils and bodies across the UK to do the same, and put much needed pressure on the government to put in place actions we need to see to combat climate change. The current mayor is still pushing policies and plans that will make climate chaos harder to prevent. This is unacceptable. Although I do agree with Leonie that actually Labour and Greens and Lib Dems have worked really well together on the climate emergency and implementing some of these measures. Greens will ensure we bring everyone with us along this journey, ensuring that people aren't left behind. So we'll set up an independent citizens assembly on the climate and ecological emergency, recruiting a representative group of Londoners to serve for a year at a time on a permanent body to find and propose ideas to respond to the climate crisis. So for our health and our future, we need real green action, and Greens are needed now to make the 2030 net zero target a reality.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next question now. This is on housing from Max Gibbons, who is a Clapham resident. How do you integrate between the people living in the expensive new build high-rises, such as Battersea and Nine Elms developments, with the people living in neighbouring council housing and estates? And also, how do you stop the negative effects of the gentrification of certain communities in areas like Brixton, where the locals are being pushed out of their old communities? Louise Calland, let's come to you first.
Yes, hi, thank you very much for that. So I think one of the things that I think perhaps isn't widely known is that whenever there are new developments built within London, the developers contribute something called community infrastructure levy, and that is actually within the gift of both local councillors but also the mayor as well. He has his own precept to enable that the infrastructure to be built around those developments, and that's exactly what it should be used for, to ensure that any new housing and new developments fit within the local community, and that where additional infrastructure is needed in order to support the new residents of that place, that it is put in place. So two things, I think, two policies particularly I want to mention. The first one is a chief placemaker that Sean is planning to appoint if he is elected. And essentially that's because, as we've sort of all seen, some neglected or less attractive areas have higher levels of antisocial behaviour, crime, more litter, etc. Whereas the better off communities are often surrounded by green spaces and beauty. And actually, Sean thinks this is totally unacceptable. So what he wants to do is appoint that chief placemaker to ensure that any new developments in London incorporate good design and significant amounts of natural beauty into every single new neighbourhood that is built by him. He also wants to ensure that there is a green compact of housing developers, as you know, our natural environment is probably our greatest resource. He's backing the National Park City campaign. So again, I think that will contribute towards ensuring that any new developments in London are biodiverse and fit in with the local communities. Do I have any more time left, Stephen?
You have about 10 seconds, so maybe if you speak very quickly.
In which case I'll just then mention quickly the 100,000 homes for £100,000 that are going to be built to help young people get on the housing ladder with genuinely affordable homes.
Perfect. So let's come to you next, Hannah Graham.
Thank you for the question. As a private renter in London, I experienced firsthand the frustration of many Londoners with the housing crisis. So on the Assembly, Greens have fought for and won huge changes in policy from the current mayor to give residents the power to vote down plans that demolish council homes. Shan's pushed the mayor so hard for nearly 3 years to get him at last talking about rent controls. And we've seen some progress this term, especially on how grants are provided for new homes. So there are higher rates for social rent and grants for real new council homes again. We've got more flexibility in funding from the new settlement from the government, helping to fund larger homes with more bedrooms. But Sian has exposed recently that actually £500 million of this has been left unspent. So it's Greens on the Assembly who are challenging these gaps and fighting for a better standard of housing for all Londoners. We've got lots of ideas about how to make housing fit for Londoners. So we must really work to bring more private rented homes under public control. The GLA Green Group budget amendment made plans for acquiring over 2,000 key workers' homes from landlords and developers that were struggling to sell what they built, using some of the unspent grant money that I mentioned to kickstart a revolving investment fund for homes at London living rent, so what average earners can really afford. Secondly, more resident and community control is needed. So we've made proposals for a right to co-op for private renters and a community right to buy like they have in Scotland. We'll prevent homelessness by working with renters and the London Renters Union to improve rights and cancel the rent debts built up during the pandemic. And we've got plans to refit homes that already exist so they're fit to meet the demand of our city. So London's next mayor really needs to argue for and win more devolved powers over our homes and land. And a Green mayor will not stop pushing the government until we win the power to set rent controls in London. And to us, you know, there's no reason why all housing and land policies should not be completely under London's control.
Wonderful. Leonie, let's come to you.
So I agree with a lot of what Hannah was just saying, particularly about the need for more powers for the mayor. One of the things that's really disappointing about the Conservative statement about 100,000 homes for £100,000 is actually under the budget that is given for housing from the government, from the Conservative government, you just can't do that. I mean, that's just fantasy nonsense. Sadiq has been arguing actually since the very beginning for more money to go towards genuinely affordable homes, but the budget is partly defined by the government as to what it can be spent upon. And the issue that your questioner raised about how do you make sure that you integrate the new developments amongst existing developments, I actually addressed in my own individual report, which we can do as Assembly members, which was about biodiversity and new housing developments, and trying to make sure that biodiversity was included. At that point, the London plan had not been finalised. Now, we've ended up with the London plan sitting on the Conservative Secretary of State's desk for a whole year before he signed it off, which is extremely annoying, but it includes many of the things that the other representatives have been talking about: green roofs, green walls, brown roofs, biodiversity in those developments, and crucially it includes net biodiversity gain and also an urban greening factor, which is a really good way to make new developments attractive, not just for humans to move into, but also for nature to move into, whether that's plants or whether that's birds and animals. And I think that's a really good way of making sure that we do integrate the new with the existing and what lies around it. But what is really important for Londoners in terms of housing is getting those affordable housing starts, and it's the largest number of socially rented, subsidised rent properties that have been started by the current mayor since 1983, and it's going to be a hard road to get the number we need, and also to bring private rents under control, which the mayor had in his last manifesto.
That's time, I'm afraid, Leonie.
So it's something he's been working on for the last 5 years.
Hina, let's hear your thoughts on housing.
Well, it's pretty clear that more the same is not going to fix the housing crisis, and unfortunately the Mayor of London hasn't reached his target. He hasn't only started only half of those affordable homes that he promised. We want to have a way of making affordable homes more accessible now. That's the way to make sure that those local people aren't pushed out, as Max said. And by doing that is the simple idea that we have, the London Housing Company that could be in charge of delivering the homes. They've done it in Rotterdam, they can do it here in London too. And we've even seen examples of it in Sutton. We have a Sutton Council owned a group called Sutton Living, which is developing affordable homes as we speak right now, and are managing to reach those targets that the rest of the London boroughs are really struggling to get. So that's the way forward for us. We also want to protect renters, and a London-wide licensing scheme for landlords is necessary to make sure that there isn't any of these rogue landlords that we hear of so much, and to end Section 21 for no-fault evictions is a way forward too. And I know that some of my colleagues here will agree with that. So the other thing is that we know that London is changing, and there is a potential here. There's no other candidates talked about this, about using office space that is going to be empty in the centre of London, and if that can be converted into affordable homes, that is good quality homes, carbon neutral homes, so, a place where people want to live. Let's change the way the dynamics of London is right now, because people are changing the way they work and live now, and this is the way forward. This is the way to recover. This is the way to learn from what we've been through during a pandemic, and the way we live needs to be a lot more different now, and I think the Liberal Democrats have got some really exciting plans forward.
Perfect. Now for our next question. So this is from Chris French, who is the founder and chair of Lambeth Links, an intersectional LGBT charity. Lambeth has the highest number of LGBT plus residents in the UK, and also the second highest hate crime incidences in London. What will you do to ensure that victims of hate crime from our community are taken seriously, and how will you hold the Metropolitan Police to account to ensure that the reports are investigated thoroughly across all London boroughs? Leonie, let's come to you first.
Well, it's one of those areas where if you look at the monitoring that has been done in the past, It hasn't been sufficient. It's been under Labour boroughs that have started campaigning to ensure that there has been equality. And the mayor himself has invested £6 million in tackling LGBTQ plus hate crime, including funding Gallup, a charity that provides specialist support around LGBTQ plus issues and policing. And I myself have hosted regular meetings on a quarterly basis of the network of LGBTQ plus forums that exist around London, bringing them together in City Hall, talking about issues around policing, chemsex, homelessness, and all of the issues that impact on the community, but can easily be overlooked in terms of the way that services are provided. So it's absolutely crucial that Londoners, who, whatever their background, feel that they have places where they can be themselves and feel protected. And Sadiq has been working really, really hard to protect places for the community. Just last month, he provided a £5.7 million loan for Tonic Housing, which is actually going to establish the first LGBTQ plus retirement community, which is a place for older Londoners where they can relax and be surrounded by people they can be completely comfortable with. He reinstated the Pride reception at City Hall, which had been completely shelved under the previous mayor, and he's also marched in the Pride parade every year since 2016, obviously apart from last year when we weren't allowed to have any parades at all. And he's also flown flags outside City Hall, and it's about making people feel inclusive. It's about making people feel it doesn't matter who you are to be in London. London is open, London is welcome.
Wonderful. Next up, why don't we hear from Hannah Graham?
Great question, Chris. Yeah, London is known for being a diverse and tolerant city, but we've got such a long way to go before we're all equal and everyone's rights are represented. Those hate crime statistics are just unacceptable. Greens have consistently challenged the Met Police on human rights, on things like tasers, spit hoods, the discriminatory gangs matrix, the facial recognition, and the right to peaceful protest. Everyone in London should have should be able to live a safe, fulfilling, and joyful life, free from discrimination, inequality, and hatred, and be able to trust public services not to discriminate. So Greens will remove any barriers which stand in the way of everyone's rights being respected. We'll make sure that there's consistent and fair assessment by councils of vulnerability and health needs of LGBTQIA plus individuals, and increase support and targeted information for young people and LGBT individuals facing homelessness, producing an LGBTQIA housing strategy for London. A Green Mayor will set up a dedicated community space for LGBT individuals within the GLA, a GLA to ensure their lives are not forgotten, and will work with local authorities to ensure that they're sensitive to the needs of trans and non-binary people. And finally, a Green Mayor will implement policy to make London the most trans-inclusive city in the world. Too many trans people face barriers in accessing healthcare, employment and housing. Discrimination and violence are just a day-to-day reality, which it's shocking. And we'll launch a commission into the needs of trans Londoners with the goal of developing a trans rights strategy for London.
Louise Calland, let's get your thoughts on this.
Thanks very much. And yes, thank you for the question. So yes, you're absolutely right. There have been 2,832 instances of homophobic hate crime in the last 12 months alone. And actually, we know that over 80% of homophobic hate crimes aren't even reported. So that is just a very small fraction of the problem that we know exists. There has also been an increase as well in trans hate crime. I think that's something like 44–45% it's gone up in the last 2 years. So these are really big problems that we need to be dealing with. So what SWLON wants to do is to make homophobic and transphobic hate crime a crime itself. So at the moment, it's only an aggravating factor. Unlike race or religion, it's not a crime in itself. And we think that it needs to absolutely be on a parity and ensure that it can be treated in the same way as other kinds of hate crime. And I think that would go a long way towards ensuring as well that the police have the powers and the resources that they need to be dealing with this as a problem. One other policy that I'm actually really excited about, and I know that Sean has been working closely with the Terence Higgin Trust on, is a policy to end all HIV transmission in London by 2028. So with, I think, about 38% of people who are receiving HIV care in London, while we know that the figures are going in the right direction and there's been enormous progress in treating and working and preventing transmission, we want to work with the government and with the NHS to ensure that public resources are targeted towards at-risk groups and beyond as the number of new transmission falls. So I think that's just another way in which we want to be working with the LGBTQ+ community around what they see as kind of their particular needs and areas of focus within London. Because as everyone has said, we're diverse, we're wonderful, we're a rainbow city.
And Hina, let's get your thoughts on this.
Louise Calland and all the London Liberal Democrats are allies to the LGBT community, and we want to celebrate London as one of the most LGBTQ friendly cities on the planet. I think that's an agreed approach from all of us, really. What we are concerned about is obviously tackling hate crime within the community, and what we want to do is ensure that the police are more responsive to their needs, and including action on reported hate crimes. There needs to be proper investigations and proper training in the Met to make sure that these crimes are dealt with properly. We also want to make sure that trans rights are defended and extended by pushing the government to reform the Gender Recognition Act. We also want to celebrate as well, delivering Pride events such as UK Black Pride and Pride in London. We want to have London's fabulous LGBTQ plus nightlife scenes flourishing with support from community listings and key venues, as has just been mentioned, and supporting LGBTQ plus focused businesses as well. That's incredibly important too, and their voluntary organisations. So there's a lot more to do, and I really do feel like the Liberal Democrats have always been there behind the community and will always be their allies.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Now, moving on to our next question. Young people's issues. So we didn't want to give the name of this boy because he is under 18, but I'm sure you'll still be able to relate to it anyway. Hi, I'm in year 12 at St John Bosco College. What is your plan for the economy of London post-lockdown, and what's your plan for children's mental health post-lockdown? So first up, let's come to Hannah Graham.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, really great to hear from a question from somebody so young. I don't know, obviously you won't get a vote this time, but Greens were the first party to basically back votes at 16, and we're really, really going to commit to that, to making sure young Londoners have this right at least by the 2024 London elections. So yeah, the power of young people's voices has been shown by the impact of young climate activists and school strikes, and a Green Mayor really want to embed the voices of young people in City Hall scrutiny and policy making. We've seen devastating impacts, devastating threats and cuts to our youth services every single year. For many young people, their youth club is their only safe space. That's where they get key mental health support. Often for young people, it's very, very difficult to access this through health services, through NHS, and often receive mental health support through more sort of community spaces with trusted adults, safe spaces away from sort of their home environment. We know that young people haven't been able to access these services through the pandemic. It's been absolutely devastating. Lots of young people have been in sort of damaging home environments because they haven't been able to access the trusted staff and youth workers and their friendship groups as well. So that's something that youth services is a holistic approach is really, really important to us. I've been a youth worker for 8 years. You can probably tell how passionate I am about this subject, and I know full well the effects of years and austerity, and I witness daily the impact of these cuts on our young people. The tragic cumulative loss of about 145 million that has been snatched away from our young people's hands in the last 7 years is just not acceptable. Sian Berry has helped reverse some of these deep cuts by winning back about 70 million for youth clubs and services, but it's just not enough. So with Sian as mayor, she would reinstate the entirety of the Young Londoners Fund, replacing the entirety of the cuts to youth services. We'll never give up pushing the government to make youth services a statutory
I'm afraid
service.
that's time, Hannah.
Okay, I've got more on that. Email me.
And let's go to Louise Calland next.
Thank you. And yeah, great to have a question from a young person. So I think the first thing I want to say is that Sian will be appointing a deputy mayor for young people. And what I think is even better about this is that it's genuinely going to be someone from Generation Z. So I would be ineligible. Everyone on this call, I think, sorry if I'm getting people's ages wrong, but would be ineligible. So it's people born after 1995, which made me feel horribly old. But they are someone who is going to genuinely ensure that all of the work of City Hall and the work across different departments to ensure that young people get that voice and their priorities sit across housing, economic recovery, job creation, all the things that are going to be important to young people. So I think another few things I want to mention, Sian's plan for economic recovery involves creating 924,000 new jobs in London. So really ensuring that London gets the kickstart and the boost that it needs. He's also going to be putting youth zones in every single borough. So, well, a new youth zone in every single borough. So that's 32 additional youth zones, 4,000 additional youth workers. As I said before, Sian has been involved in youth work his whole life. He knows how important it is that some young people have a place to go, that where they can talk to somebody about their mental health, about the issues that might be on their mind, that perhaps they don't feel like they have an outlet to do with family or within academia or wherever else they might go. So Sian is going to be working with something called a company called Onside Youth Zone to create these new areas where people can go and talk about their mental health. I think the other thing to talk about in terms of economic recovery are things like the High Street Recovery Fund. So ensuring that local places as well get that input of resources and the input that they need so that we don't see shops on our high street start to close and people feel as though they're losing their jobs within the hospitality sector. So Deputy Mayor for Young People who's genuinely young.
Fantastic. Leonie, let's come to you on this.
Well, it's great to hear that Sian is thinking about reversing some of the things that he was responsible for when he was government advisor in Number 10 to David Cameron and to George Osborne between 2010 and 2012, because the pinnacle of his career as in youth work was to go into Number 10 and to advise the coalition government on how to make cuts to youth services. And one of the reasons why we've got a number of the problems that we've got is because the huge cuts to local authorities, as well as the £1 billion cuts to the police that have been made. Now, Sadiq has, on the other hand, been championing the needs of young people ever since he came into politics. And since he became the Mayor of London, he's invested £70 million in his Young Londoners Fund to try and address some of this huge reduction in funding from the government. He's also helped more than 1,100 young Londoners get trained in digital, entrepreneurial and employability skills. He's put funding into a wide range of really interesting areas, which the Conservatives, particularly in City Hall, have just laughed at, because he's supported things like London Fashion Week. He's supported, London Film and all the different jobs that come from that. He's supported people getting into music. I don't think he's actually specifically supported Riverside Radio, but it's this kind of area where Riverside Radio, and you're working in the creative field, and it's the kind of thing that a lot of young Londoners are really interested in doing. And it's entrepreneurial, it's fun, it's digital, it's very forward-facing and future-facing. And those are the kind of things that Sadiq has been funding for young people, the way of the future. Look, I'm not a star on TikTok, and I'm sure no one else on this call is either. But we need to be supporting people as we move into the future, not just TikTok, but other kind of digital platforms.
And that's time, I'm afraid, Leonie.
That Sadiq has been supporting. Thank you, Stephen.
Perfect. Hina, let's get your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm a founder of a charity that mentors young people. So I'm really, really pleased that we've got a question from somebody so young, because actually when I talk to them, this is exactly what they are talking to me about. They are very worried about the potential of getting a job at the moment. And so that's why Louisa, who just so happens to be one of the youngest candidates out of the major parties, has the young people completely focused in her approach and what we need to do forward to take London forward, because she believes that young people need to be at the heart of the recovery. She wants an apprenticeship hub. Now, this will unlock more apprenticeship opportunities for young Londoners, based on a UCAS style hub for those seeking apprenticeships and those offering it. Only 8% of London firms have an apprentice, so it's obviously not working at the moment. So we need to change, and we need to make this accessible for young people. We also want to have a London youth service. We want to create a joined up approach for youth services, expanding access to positive after school activities, so they're not having to just hang out and get bored. We have plans to address all of these issues for young people through mental health as well. I know that he was very concerned about that. So what we want to do is widen access to high quality mental health services, support community services to tackle things like loneliness, because young people get lonely too, and prevent that kind of isolation that they can get. Work with borough councils to introduce counsellors in every school. Now, that's starting to happen. That's the way forward, I think. If schools can start having more counsellors, that will be a really good way forward for young people. And developing new tracking metrics to enable wellbeing budgets in City Hall. So that's the way forward for us. And I really believe that we've got the right agenda for young people.
Hina Bokhari, thank you very much. We are on to our final question of the evening. So here we go. This is obviously a massive, massive issue here in Southwest London. This is from Michelle Coulter from the Hammersmith Bridge SOS Steering Group. I'm Michelle Coulter from the Hammersmith SOS Steering Group. The closure of Hammersmith Bridge since April 2019 to traffic and since August to pedestrians and cyclists is having a devastating effect on the lives of thousands of Londoners. My question is, what are you going to do to ensure that the reopening of the bridge to pedestrian cyclists is immediate short term, is made an urgent priority? And how do you propose to unlock the funding stalemate, which is preventing any progress on long-term repairs? Hina, let's come to you first.
I completely understand the devastating effect this has had on the local community, and as somebody who used that bridge so often, I can just imagine the pain that it's causing a lot of families and businesses. It's been severely impacting their life, and I think I'm just as frustrated by the political stalemate that we're at the moment. A cross-party approach would obviously been a better way forward, but it has been used as it's been battered around politically, particularly during the last general election. Zach Goldsmith was promising all sorts of things, and now Sean Bailey's promising all sorts of things, and all these promises of temporary bridges being costing £7 million. And well, at the end of the day, we have got a Conservative government. And if they promised to do this, then why didn't they just get on with the job? And that's what's really frustrating for local councils. Councils can't afford this. This is not part of their budget. They have enough problems as it is, trying to make sure that we cover the social care costs at the moment for councils, and then to expect them to fork out the amount of money that's necessary for Hammersmith Bridge is just not reasonable. I think it's an incredible shame, but you're right though, that Michelle, that we do need to have urgent priorities specifically on maybe walking access and a bicycle access across that bridge. There are lots of ideas also to getting a ferry as well, and I think that's going to be happening soon, so that's good news. But you're right, it's been an absolute tragedy, and I think what the Liberal Democrats are saying is that, well, if we don't have a tunnel going under the river and use that money instead to invest on the bridge, that might be a way forward.
Perfect. Louise Calland, let's come to you.
Thank you. So we have a really solid 3-point plan for Hammersmith Bridge. What we're going to do is we're going to bring forward the ferry service that's at the moment not mooted to start until late summer, so let's say September. We are going to begin work immediately on a temporary road bridge, and then there will also be funding available from a new London infrastructure bank to accelerate the refurbishment of Hammersmith Bridge as it currently stands. So as I'm hopefully you're all aware, Sean has been pushing government to set up the task force that is now in place, that is looking at proposals for the new bridge. So that was very much something that Sean was pushing on. He is aware that all of this, the traffic that normally goes over Hammersmith Bridge, is very much coming into Putney Bridge at the moment, and making what is already a very busy and quite polluted area even more busy and even more polluted. So it's essential that we get onto this as quickly as possible, rather as well than just saying central government should fix this. I do want to ask people, if a bridge went down in Richmond in North Yorkshire, would we expect central government to fix it, or would we expect Yorkshire to do so? Despite that, and because government are aware just how important a piece of infrastructure this is, there are proposals in place for some of the funding to come from central government. But I think what I really want to put out there is that Sean has a plan, it's ready to go, and it's fully funded. This infrastructure bank will fully pay for these huge projects like Hammersmith Bridge. It's based on a German model from a bank in Frankfurt. It's a lot like the National Infrastructure Bank that Rishi Sunak, you may have heard mentioned in the last budget, even though we genuinely thought of it first. But yeah, fully funded, ready to go, 3-point plan.
Amazing. Leonie Cooper, you're next.
So the funding situation for transport in London and the roads in London is interesting. The GLC was abolished by the Conservative government in the 1980s, and at that point the bridges were given to different boroughs. And I referred, I think it was almost in my first remark, so a very long time ago as it now feels, there was a budget given by government from Highways England to London of £700 million a year. And the previous mayor, who is now the Prime Minister, decided to give that back to government. So now Londoners pay £500 million a year in vehicle excise duty. When you tax your car, the money goes in, it goes into Highways England. And unlike every other part of the country, whether that be Richmond in Yorkshire or whether that be anywhere else outside of London, all of the other areas in London all get money back from Highways England. Londoners do not. So we're now in a situation where Hammersmith Bridge has become a photo opportunity. I think it was Hina was just talking about Zach Goldsmith went to stand next to it with Grant Shapps. And then we saw Sean Bailey going to stand next to the bridge with Grant Shapps. And absolutely nothing has happened yet. The bridge belongs to Hammersmith and Fulham Council. It's been given to them. There is no funds that comes to them, unlike Richmond in Yorkshire. And it's completely unfair why the government has not accepted any of the 3 funding bids that have been submitted between 2019 and 2020. Actually, TfL has put a lot of money into investigating the micro fractures with divers going down to look at the, it's a very ancient bridge, and it's quite a difficult structure to fix up. It's got fractures throughout. It's made out of a material that you wouldn't use these days for bridges. And while its closure is causing massive disruption, it's up to the government to come to the table and fund something that needs the money. Why
Leonie, I'm afraid that's time.
Expected to put 140 million in, or TfL, is ridiculous. No other part of the country would be expected to do this.
Hannah, you get the last word on the last question. What are your thoughts on Hammersmith Bridge?
Yeah, it sounds to me that actually a lot of the funding has been committed to in this conversation. But yeah, we really need to see real commitment from the next mayor to getting Hammersmith Bridge open for walking and cycling. The mayor needs to pick a fixed date and stick to it. So Greens in South West London have been doing loads of work on this already. They've already written to the current mayor with a petition calling for clarity, collaboration and certainty over the future of Hammersmith Bridge. Lack of direction and funding from the government, mayor and London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham means that residents are being asked to wait for years before the bridge is reopened to walking and cycling, with the Promise Ferry has obviously got no fixed starting date or information about what's going to be provided. So we want three key things. We want basically to let Londoners know when the bridge can be safely reopened for walking and cycling, set a date and stick to it. We want to make an immediate plan to improve temporary transport links by providing safe, protected, well-lit routes for people to walk and cycle on either side of the river, connected initially by the ferry and eventually the bridge when it reopens. and reassure Londoners that the ferry service starting soon will carry bicycles and be free to use. So we don't want to see residents suffer anymore as a consequence of the bridge being out of action. People are being denied access to hospitals, schools, friends and family, effectively just being cut off from the other side of the capital. So that's, you know, not acceptable to us. So currently no one in government, Transport for London or Hammersmith and Fulham Council is taking responsibility for fixing Hammersmith Bridge and the funding, and it's being used for political point scoring than, you know, than actually helping residents. So we think it's really time for all the stakeholders to collaborate properly and provide West London with certainty and clarity about what's happening.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that concludes the Southwest London debate. I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to all of the candidates and all of the parties who attended here tonight, and I hope they answered your questions. Thank you to the whole team at Riverside Radio and over at our partners as well, southwestlondoner.com. And from all of us here, goodbye. So to all of our YouTube viewers, I'm afraid we are going to go, but if, like me, you love the news and you love politics, we will be sitting here for another half an hour dissecting everything that was just said over the last 90 minutes. Give us 5 minutes and we'll be back on air with Tom Holmes, Monica Charlesley, and Mark Mayo.